Good to see you both. We've stepped away from the Royals for this hour because we looked at them quite a lot in the last hour. Matthew, you want to kick off with The Guardian, and this front page is about cancer wait times on the NHS.
Yeah, because most of the front pages this morning are covered with the coronation, and understandably so. You can see that spectacular photograph there taken from behind the King and the Queen on Saturday. But actually what's really going to affect people, and what is affecting people in very damaging ways, is this enormous waiting list on the NHS. 7.2 million people waiting for scans and treatments. It's terrifying. Well, I've got a very close friend who's in their 70s, who's got a chronic and very, very painful back condition. I think their wait is 80 weeks. They spent a combined total of 25 hours over 2 stints in A&E. This is really scary stuff, and the most senior GP in the country, and that's what this article on the front page of The Guardian is based around, is saying that people are just feeling helpless. And what's really scary is they're getting worse while they're on those waiting lists, which isn't surprising. So people who might have potential signs for cancer might be developing cancer while they wait. People with heart conditions are struggling. People who've got, waiting for a knee op or perhaps a back operation, they're having to crawl upstairs if their loos are on their first floor, if their bathrooms are on the first floor. Now, the question is, why is this happening? But also, what can be done about it? One of Rishi Sunak's 5 key pledges is that he wants to reduce waiting lists. Is that really happening? He'll be judged at the next election, of course. There is so much more to be done. Some will say, well, it's inevitable because of what happened in the pandemic and lockdowns, and no doubt that is a massive part of it. Others will say that the NHS has been mismanaged over the last 13 years.
Oh, Matthew, we're just losing your signal, so we'll just move across to Mark, and I think you've pretty much got to the end of your point as well. Mark, you've moved away from the NHS and on to what happened over the weekend, and in terms of the arrests. 64 people arrested by the Metropolitan Police on Saturday as part of their clampdown on protests. Do you think it was heavy-handed? Do you think it was proportionate?
Well, whether it's heavy-handed or proportionate depends on what newspaper you read. I mean, if you obviously look to the Mail, there's quite a supportive piece in terms of what the police chose to do. If you look elsewhere, there's probably some concern that sort of peaceful protesters who certainly didn't come armed with the sort of equipment that you would normally expect from some of those looking for direct response to their issues like Stop Oil, being a bit heavy-handed, and in fact the sort of head of Republic has been quite scathing in terms of the way it's treated, specifically because they were in sync with the Met, explaining exactly what they were going to do, and they feel, quite mistreated. In fact, they've spent a long time being held up in terms of what they thought was a peaceful protest.
Moving on to politics from last week, we just talked about it in our political disco just a short while ago, the inside of the Mail. Matthew, you're back with us. Labour won't rule out a deal with the Lib Dems to run Britain. I mean, this is obviously something that the Conservatives and the Conservatives supporting Daily Mail newspaper too would happily push, this idea that it will all be chaos under the Labour Party if they would have to form a coalition government. But talking to Sonia Soda just a short while ago, she thinks they've got the figures and that wouldn't be likely.
Possibility. I mean, none of us know what's going to happen, but predictions are for mugs. There's a whole range of different scenarios, one of which is something along the lines of what happened in 2010. The Tories were expected to get a majority, then they didn't. It was a hung parliament. It could very well be a hung parliament, and if that's the case, then it's highly likely that Labour would do a deal with the Lib Dems. It's not surprising that the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is not going to commit himself to that. Of course not. Labour wants to be confident. They want to show that they can win outright. in their own right. I don't think that the prospect of a Lib Dem Labour coalition is anything like as toxic to voters in England and some in Scotland as the prospect in 2015 of a Labour coalition with the SNP. That's one of the things that sunk Ed Miliband's campaign to become Prime Minister then. And one of the reasons for that is because I think a lot of people who have big doubts about the Conservatives and the chaos of recent years, perhaps, for example, in the home counties, they might very well be turning to the Liberal Democrats if they don't feel they can bring themselves to switch to Labour, to go the full hog, as it were. So I think there's a possibility of a coalition. I don't think there'll be any sort of pre-election pact. And in order to do as well as they can do, Labour will feel very strongly that they have to give off this sense of confidence that, as I say, they can win on their own terms.
Mark, just to you before you go, the inside of The Guardian, how Penny Mordaunt stole the show with this 3.6 kilogram sword. We were talking about her possibility running for Conservative leadership as well, on a more serious note. But she did rather steal the show on Saturday, did she not?
Well, she was one of the surprise hits, and in fact, many papers go to call her the new sword-wielding goddess. I mean, she seemed that she was auditioning for a part in the Game of Thrones. And of course, in the Telegraph, there's suggestions that in fact she'll make a fantastic leader. I'm not sure whether, as your previous item suggested, whether
Matthew, Mark, we're going to leave it there. We'll see you in the next hour. Stay with Sky.